Good morning. This is Kate Reese with Family Matters with Reese Law. We are a family law firm based in Fairfax, Virginia, with offices in Prince William County, and we serve the Northern Virginia area. Today, we're talking about how do I care for my parents and my children? It is called the sandwich generation. And we have with us Jenn Folsom to discuss work-life balance and what is called the sandwich generation. And this is when you're caring for your elders and your children and how you possibly manage that. Jenn is a graduate of Georgetown University and has written The Ringmaster about managing life and ultimately finding balance if you can. You may not be able to have it all the time, but certainly some of the time. And is a growth leader in a government management consulting firm. Today, we are going to discuss how to best help your immediate and extended family and survive it. Hi, Jenn. Thank you for being our guest today and sharing your knowledge. And I thank you for joining us on Family Matters. So tell us about what it means to be part of the sandwich generation. I understand you fell into that when your mom became ill.
Yeah, I've been a working mom the whole time. I think all moms work, but I've worked full time for the last 20 years. I have 20-year-old twins and a 15-year-old. And my mom, up until last November, had served as my father's main caregiver. He's bedbound, Parkinson's, prostate cancer, a number of other issues. And she had a stroke in November that really caught us all by surprise, followed by one in January. So all sort of last winter, my brother and I each live about 2.5 hours away in either direction. We're scrambling to take care of them. And, as many people of a certain generation, they had not made sort of the appropriate plans. They didn't have, they were in the house that they bought in 1972 with, lots of stairs and that sort of thing. So, pretty quickly, although I'm, in a pretty big day job and have a lot of professional responsibilities and frankly, lots of ambition. I want to do more work, being pulled in different directions, particularly as my older two sons decided they didn't want to return to college. I wanted to try a different path. My high
This
school.
is not a good time, boys.
No, no, right. Like, come on, guys, I need everyone on board here. And it is just tough because you're always pulled in different direction, and that's where that sandwich comes from. Most of the time, frankly, I feel like a little bit of fried bologna on that sandwich generation. It's a really tough place to be.
And as far as getting squeezed with the caregiving responsibilities and the children and your parents, how did that impact work-life balance? Did your priorities just shift in a second, 50 times a day?
Yes, and you mentioned the book Ringmaster. I wrote this book sort of about the fact that there really is no work-life balance, and that's what I learned over the sort of the first 15 years or so of working and being a mom. But instead, I'm a classic consultant. I got to have a framework for everything. The idea with the Ringmaster is that it's your three-ring circus, so you can just embrace that. There is no balance. The idea here is that there's three rings: work, life, and you. But if you're the ringmaster, you're in charge, and you decide what goes in each of those rings and where and when that spotlight shines. And I think I sort of naively believed that early on when my kids were younger, that this was my years to sort of focus on them as smaller children. When I found, that maybe you have as well, like as they get older, you kind of just need to be around more. It's one thing when they're taking 2 2-hour naps a day and you're at work. So, I think I sort of foolishly assumed that there would be good blocks of time that I could devote to different parts of my life. When in reality, it is day to day, it's hour to hour, sometimes minute to minute. So, I'm getting a text from my 15-year-old about paying his gym clothes fee for high school while fielding calls from the caregivers while on a Zoom call for work. It's sort of a constant balance. And frankly, it caused me some burnout. It really, I was surprised by both the physical and emotional toll this has taken on me personally.
And how did you feel that? Was your sleep disrupted? Was your mind scrambling? Like one general aspect of anxiety is that the brain's going so fast and there's so much information processing through that it kind of makes it hard for you to think.
It
Did you have that type of experience with it?
100%. And I would be exhausted, but lay there and think about all the things I needed to do at night, or stay up late trying to catch up at work because I'd been taking my folks to different doctor's appointments when I knew what my body really needed was sleep.
Right.
I think something that you don't realize when your kids are younger is that when they become teenagers, they turn into raccoons and they are up all night in the kitchen. Like, so I need to go to bed at 9:30, okay, and I need to be quiet and not have these large boys up and down the stairs waking me up, and then I'm worried about where they've been and what they're doing. And when I
Right.
do stay with my parents, they're likewise. They're up all night. There's a little bit of wandering. It's a safety concern. So we've gotten to a place where my brother and I each sort of alternate weekends, and we have full time
Uh-huh.
care during the week, and we have both have some weekends off. But that still means there's some substantial time away from my own family and things like bills getting paid, groceries being bought, meals being planned, social obligations, homework supervision, all of those things I can't do if I'm not here.
And God forbid you'd want to do something like go to a yoga class just for you.
Exactly.
That did not hit your
It didn't
list
hit the
at
list. It
all.
didn't, those first few months, and, you asked about how that impacted me. It definitely impacted my sleep, it impacted my ability to perform at work. I was burnt out, I had that, like, constant stress, no creativity, not making
Mhm.
solid, good decisions, about my personal health. Like, I would, pour a second cocktail in the evening versus doing a yoga nidra video when I knew what was a better thing for me, but I just wasn't making really good decisions. I was very tactical. It was hard to see the long view. And I do think it's a
Mhm.
little bit harder with your parents than with your children, right? Because the children, they're making all these milestones, and as hard as it is, it's going to get easier. With your parents, it's going to get harder. And particularly with the
Mhm.
dementia side, it's a long goodbye. So I'm also sort of grieving through this process,
Yeah.
parenting my parents, but also grieving their loss one miserable day at a time. And it's not where anyone wants to be. But it's
No.
also very hard for my sons to understand just what a burden that is. Not a burden, I hate to use that word. What a giant responsibility that is and how it weighs on me.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
I've really focused on trying to get them to step up. I think for the older boys, this has been an opportunity to figure out a lot of things on their own. Like, whereas, those with ADHD and sort of that prefrontal cortex not quite developed have a hard time doing things like managing a work schedule or getting prescriptions refilled with the three steps involved.
Right.
But they kind of have to just do that now. I can't sort it out
Right. Well, they're getting an education on what life can be like under those
for sure.
circumstances, and hopefully they will not be in a position that they need that, but they at least understand,
Right.
and they have the benefit of seeing their parent or parents being compassionate to others. And dementia is such a tough one. They are busy trying to assert their independence in ways that you have to worry about, is it safe? I'm going to go drive to the store, or I'm going to go cook dinner, and it just gets very scary. So the level of care that you have to provide is pretty impressive if they're paying attention and seeing how that's going, and hopefully appreciating you and the time that you
Well,
make for
I
them.
hope that down the road that's the case. It's hard to know what's hitting right now. But I
Yeah.
think I also have to empathize with them. They're very close to my parents. So, seeing this is very hard for them too. And without sort of a lifetime of experiences and limited sort of emotional capability, underdeveloped, it's hard to process that too. It's hard. They're not the same people anymore. And they have been very helpful, particularly around caring for their dogs and stuff around the house, but they're not going to clean up granddad and get him in the shower. That's just not something that they're going to do, and
Yeah.
they shouldn't, you know. Um,
No.
but I do think what I found is I've talked about this a little bit more openly. It's kind of like
Mhm.
as you're in the slog together when you've got those young children and you're going through sleep training and COVID restrictions until they're vaccinated. All those things are kind of in it together. But when they kind of sneak into your Zoom meeting and sit on your lap, I love that we have this exposure now. Like our caregiving is, real time for the whole world to see. And
Right.
it's not quite the same cuddly, good, warm, and fuzzy feeling when your dad comes by with this walker, like with his bed head, and he's in his pajamas and he's grumbling at me. That's not as easy to talk about with my coworkers. But I find that so many, and particularly women, are faced with this, and it's often hitting when they're really at that peak of their careers and that peak earning potential. So, and frankly, I
Mhm.
know that there are many men who are caregivers, but much of it is falling on women.
Yes. And we know that historically the women are the caretakers. I know as a family law attorney, I have a lot of families where the effort expended for the children is drastically different between each parent. It might also be drastically different for who takes care of the house. But I think that the statistics are still on target that women are primarily the caregivers, not the only caregiver necessarily, but they've got a more of a load to take care of, and they handle certain things, and the husbands might handle certain other things, or the other spouse. But mom seems to be the last stop.
Yeah, and I do, when I get frustrated, I think to myself, this is kind of a bonus season with my parents. Either one of those strokes could have killed my mother. My dad is hanging on, and every time I have a good conversation with him, I say, this is worth it. And it won't go on forever. And I know that. And I have to give myself a little pat on the back for having the emotional fortitude and resilience to keep going with it, because it is rough. Particularly with the dementia side. Sometimes they don't know who I am, or why haven't you seen me in months? I was here last week. So that part is really,
Right.
really tough. And I think maybe some ways that's like a bit of a superpower for women. We can do this. Should we bear the responsibility alone? No, no. And my husband is a tremendous supporter, and really all the time that I've spent down in my parents' hometown has been, he's keeping the fort secure and strong here. So you can't do it
Good.
alone.
Good, good, good. So, as far as how you managed, it sounds like you did a fair amount of triaging, and
Yeah.
especially after your mom's first stroke and then followed by the second, and to stabilize the caregiving and find good caregivers. That can take 40 hours right there, if not 80, to find a good caregiver. And that was 80 hours you didn't have in your schedule
No,
before.
so
So,
we started from scratch, and if I could go back and do anything differently, it would be to really insist that they let me take over some of the things. I've always wanted to make
mm,
sure I gave my parents agency, and they have different levels of education than I have, but this is their life, their home,
mhm,
their way
right.
forward, and I really wanted to be respectful of that. They were always very respectful and encouraged me to do my thing, be independent, take my own road, and I feel like they're owed that. That said, there were definitely some signs of dementia. I probably should have been more aware of that. I probably should have insisted on a full workup to understand sort of where we
Mhm,
were, even before the stroke,
mhm,
and take over some of the finances and really make sure that those legal framework documents, the big picture stuff, like how is that house titled, and is there a mortgage on it, and what are your last wishes?
right.
Do you want to be on life support? There was nothing. There were no wills, just nothing. And
Oh,
I
wow.
think that they started at a time where, they didn't have a lot of money, they didn't have a lot of assets. But as you know,
Mhm,
navigating what things look like and how you title things, there's a 5-year look back for Medicaid if they need long-term care, and all these things I sort of could have started planning a little bit earlier. Um, that was really hard to do, right? So I first sort of got
mhm.
in there. I kind of moved down there for a while, took care of my dad while my mom was in the hospital for almost 5 weeks. I
Wow.
started interviewing caregivers. I found some really tremendous
Mhm,
ones through referrals as well as just care.com. So I've got one sort of main house manager who's there during the week. We call him St. David. He is amazing. Um, and I went to an elder care caseworker to get some support. I went
mhm,
to an elder care attorney to get some guidance on preparing
mhm.
the right documents, and just paid for it myself, knowing that I would have to deal with the fallout anyway. So, like, this is an
Right,
investment for
right,
me. Um, and
right.
then started the long slog of trying to figure out passwords and changing every account name. And every time I think I'm done, and this is for people without substantial assets, there's one more thing that requires a different, um, power of attorney from their paperwork, not my own, even though I have this. And they want it faxed to them in the year of our Lord 2022, a fax machine. And I'm like, where do I even find a fax these days? You have secure document uploads. Wow, what? But like, it's still such a daily burden. So when I'm not there, there's an hour or two a day that I'm coordinating with doctors, nurses, caregivers, paying the bills,
Mhm.
sorting things out, managing the budget. And I think that that sort of like invisible labor is the thing that a lot of
Mhm.
folks don't anticipate down the road.
Right, right. It's like they're all ready to make that peanut butter and jelly sandwich, except they have no bread.
Exactly.
And and they don't realize that they need bread if they want to make the sandwich, and that they don't have the bread because it hasn't been bought yet. And
Absolutely.
so, yeah, there's definitely jump forwards that happen. And how do you feel that your children are doing now that you've been in this situation for a while? Not just love and care and enough time with mom, but are they thriving, or is it has it slowed their progress to not have you available?
It's a good question. And I think, there's three different individuals that are all different levels of coping and
Mhm.
maturity. And in many ways, like, I mean, as you mentioned, like maybe this is just a good thing. They have to kind of figure some stuff out on their own. All three of my sons have ADHD. And so, the figuring things out requires a lot of support, medication management, that sort of thing. So, I think that that's a work in progress. And it's something that weighs on me. But I have to say, um, I've had the most encouraging and supportive work system and manager that I could have ever imagined. In fact, my boss, she emailed or texted me last night and said, like, how are things going at your folks? I know you had some hiccups last week with caregivers. And I just said,
Mhm.
I really appreciate one of my colleagues covered a proposal for me that I couldn't handle. And she said, the whole team has your
Good.
back anytime you need to be there.
That's
And
nice.
sort of just creating this environment where I don't feel like I'm a burden to my teammates because I'm not available all the time. That I feel that trusted
Mhm.
environment where I'm not going to get sacked because I call and say, I'm not going to make this review cycle. Can someone else review this doc for me? And that there's no
Right.
backlash, right? I'm not seen as less than. So creating that sort of really hyper flexible, sometimes I need to work on weekends because a couple hours during the week I'm at appointments. It's been
Right.
wonderful. It's wonderful. It's what's made this possible.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Now, I have a question that doesn't seem to have been exactly your experience, but I've had this experience. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. And just the parents won't talk about it. They don't want to, I think, to some extent, they don't want to accept their own mortality, which is real, and we all feel that, and their capability. Um, but things need to get done, like
Yes.
the the papers that you would run through an estate and trust firm, um, and just how they want things to finish,
It is.
how they
I
want
do
things
think
to
it's somewhat.
end. We want to
Right. I
know.
think it's a little bit generational and a little bit of like, well, I grew up working class. I don't really have any money. Well, okay. How is your house titled? Do you want it to go to probate? And what is it that you want? Do you want to be buried or cremated? These are things that I need
Right.
to know. And if you let me know, that's a gift to me. So I've really tried to reframe it as I'm so blessed and lucky that I get this bonus season with you all, and I'm able to be here a lot and take care of you. But I need this from you too. I need you to give me some direction because if not, then that is putting this on me, and that's not fair. And I tend to fight my overwhelm in general with lots of
Mhm.
organization. That's kind of how I get my kids know if I start manically like going through the mudroom and getting rid of old stuff and putting away the summer stuff. They're like, oh god, mom's had a day. But like I just need to kind of like get my hands on something and sense of order and control. So for me, working with some of the experts like the banker and the attorney and the elder care caseworker,
Mhm.
that helped me to get organized and say, okay, look, here's where we are. These are the 10 things we're going to need to do. Let's prioritize them. Safety, caregiving. Let's get the finances in order. Let's get the legal docs in order. And once I sort of triaged it and worked through a plan, it was okay. But I've had to have a couple of really hard conversations with my parents. I mean, frankly, I didn't even ask them if they wanted to work with an attorney. I just said, "Oh, by the way, so and so is popping by at 1 o'clock, and we're going to have coffee, and he's going to talk to you about the legal documents that we need to have in place." I just did it. Well,
That's probably the best way to go because asking my mom for 3 years didn't really get me very
no,
far.
and it's
Um,
really hard when
but
it's your own parent. I think that
yeah,
we've created a really good support system for them with caregivers, and they continue to reinforce the things that I'm saying and drawing a couple hard
good.
lines. I said, "Mom, if you want my help, you have to get this in order. That's it. Hard line. I'll always be your dog. I always love
Yeah.
you. But if you want my help in running your life here, this is what we're going to need to do." And so figure out what your hard line is. And it make
Mm.
that happen. That or ambush. I don't know if that's a good strategy, but it worked for us.
But that might be the exactly right strategy when you're seeing things that are not going particularly well and they're not paying attention to it the same way that you would have it paid attention to because they're not getting to a conclusion. They're like lobbing the ball, but they're not lobbing it to somebody who's going to be effectively
Well, but then,
helpful.
like, this is not fun stuff
So,
to talk about, right? We can talk about all these
mm,
other things, but this is really uncomfortable, and the closer you are to it, the more uncomfortable it is, and that's why, I told my husband, I'm like, "I get that bonus this year, we're buying long-term care insurance because I don't want any of this," right? And I have boys, like, they better marry well, but, I don't have a daughter that's gonna come sailing through as Superwoman to help take care of us in our later years, and it's the one inevitable.
right,
We will all go, right? So we can choose to
right,
to make that, a burden for our loved ones, or we can tee it up for them and make it easy. Like, let's just talk about what we
right.
want while we're healthy. And I think these are really, really tough conversations to have, and I think you could acknowledge it. I'm on basically a public service campaign with all of my friends. Like, hey, where are you with your parents on this?
Mhm,
Who's got power of attorney? Are you on their checkbook? Can you pay their bills? Like, do you have the app
mhm,
for their doctor so you can send messages to the physician? So, I do feel like I've
right.
created this sort of body of knowledge, and I'm like, sign me up. I'll go. I'll sit down with you. Invite me over for
Mm,
tea with grandma, and I will sit down and say, "Grandma, it's time."
yeah, yeah. Well, that's a very valuable service because you're right. It is, and the child, the adult child can have a very difficult time not wanting to face their parents' mortality, et cetera. The same issues that the parents can have, and that can lead to nothing getting done,
Yes.
and that's not helpful. That doesn't solve any problems. So, well, I thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Um, I ask our audience to please subscribe to our podcast channel so that you never miss an episode. You can also visit our website at reislawoffice.com. You can contact Jenn Folsom on social media at Jennifer C. Folsom, her MSNBC column at knowyourvalue.com, and with a website robust with information at jenniferfolsom.net for more information. And Jenn, would you like to comment on the book that you authored? And where it is available from.
Yeah, Ringmaster, work life and keeping it all together. I have found this framework to
Okay.
be as helpful, maybe even more, as I've entered this sandwich generation of caregiving, available on Amazon and all the places you buy books.
Well, then everybody knows how to get it if it's on Amazon. So that's great. All right. Well, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Have a
Thanks
great
for
rest
having
of the
me.
day. Thank you.
This podcast was produced by Heartcast Media.